about 8:25. And thank you for your attention, your promptness. Good morning, my name is Bob Mancini. I'm the Executive Director of the Society of CPAs. And along with my esteemed colleague, John Gregory, who is the President and CEO of the Northern Rhode Island Chamber, it gives me great pleasure to be here this morning for our second forum. A couple of years ago, we hosted one for the gubernatorial, and it was very successful. And we are here today for this very important race. I'd like to thank the Marriott, and most importantly, the staff of the Northern Rhode Island Chamber, who actually put this thing together very quickly and very appropriately. I'd like to welcome the candidates. Congressman Cicilline, good morning, sir. Colonel Doherty, good morning, sir. Good morning. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce the keynote speaker from our sponsorship, Mr. John Gregory, who is the Vice President of Public Affairs for Fidelity. John?
Good morning, everybody. I appreciate you coming out. I know you're not here to see me, so I will. Oh, maybe you are. Maybe I'm wrong.
At least the Fidelity table.
At least a couple of people. I promise I'll be brief. It's a pleasure for Fidelity to be able to support an event like this. Two such esteemed gentlemen up on the stage. This is a very important race, as I'm sure everybody knows, and it's every day you hear the news and it's reinforced. And I'm sure the people in this room are going to get out and vote, but when you look at the Central Falls race, please keep in mind that one vote can make a difference. Don't take the day off on the 6th. Please get out here and cast your vote one way or the other. Some of you folks I've met, I was the former chair of the Northern Rhode Island Chamber of Commerce. That was a position I treasured. A couple quick notes on Fidelity, just in case people don't know. We opened in Smithfield in 1998. It seems like just yesterday, but next year will actually be our 15th anniversary of opening the Smithfield campus, which is sort of remarkable. In those 15 years, we'll have created over 1 million square feet of Class A real estate on our Smithfield campus. We now have well over 3,000 full-time people working in Smithfield with 3 corporate headquarters. And I'm pleased to say we have well over 100 jobs open today in Smithfield for a variety of folks, particularly with experience in financial services and experience in the tech fields. So if you know of anybody, send them our way. We are looking for, we are actively hiring folks right now. Nationally, for the people that, just to give some context to our scale, we have $3.7 trillion under administration on behalf of our customers. And right now we have about over 20 million customers of the entire complex, including advisors as well as individuals. And one thing about Congress that's important, very important to us, most marketing people wouldn't name their premier products after portions of the federal code. I mean, our best-selling product is a 401k, and 5.9 plans are also a big seller. 501c3s, corporations you give monies to. But all our products, the marketing that we do, the products are created in Washington. And a lot of what we do is regulated in Washington. So for us, what happens in Congress is really, really critical to our business success. And as such, we are very pleased to be able to sponsor this breakfast morning and get more insight into the 2 candidates. Just want to say thank you again for being here. Pleased to be the host, and I will turn you over to Mr. Gregory. Thank you again.
Thank you, John. And thank you for being one of our corporate sponsors as well. I want to thank all our corporate sponsors. You can see their logos on the banners on the wall. My name is John Gregory, and I'm President and CEO of the Northern Rhode Island Chamber of Commerce, and I will be moderating this debate. We had a brief meeting with the candidates. I want to explain the format to you as I did to them. First of all, we'll have opening statements from both candidates, and based on what the draw, as it were, Congressman Cicilline will be going first, and he'll be followed by Colonel Doherty. Then we'll get into questions, and during the question and answer period, each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer a question, and then there'll also be 1 minute rebuttals from the candidate's opponent. At the end, we'll also have 3 minute closing statements from both candidates. One of the things that we do ask you to, if you haven't already, is to make sure that you turn off your cell phones, please, and put them in the silent mode. We'd appreciate that very, very much. We also would ask respectfully that if the candidate that you may be in favor and gives like this outstanding answer and you want to clap, don't. Okay? Or vice versa, we don't want to hear any boos either. What we'd like you to do is to hold your applause until the end of the forum. I want to let you know that, again, there will be 6 questions, and the questions have been submitted by members of the society and also by members of the Northern Rhode Island Chamber of Commerce. And I just want to echo what Bob said. It's a great pleasure for us here at the Northern Rhode Island Chamber of Commerce to work with our good friends at the Rhode Island Society of CPAs. So let's get things started. And again, based on the draw that we had, our first opening statement will come from Congressman Cicilline.
Thank you, John. Thank you to the Northern Rhode Island Chamber of Commerce for hosting this forum, and thank you to Mr. Doherty for agreeing to be part of it. I think this is obviously a very consequential election, not just for Rhode Island, but for our country. And the #1 priority that we face here in Rhode Island, I think all across America, is getting our economy back on track and getting people back to work. I think we need to focus on 6 or 7 key areas. First and foremost, understanding that education is a key part of our success, both as a country and as an economy, and that includes everything from Head Start to Pell Grants and workforce development. Understanding that we need to, secondly, rebuild the infrastructure of our country, our roads, our bridges, our ports, our transit systems. If we're going to have an economy in the 21st century that competes successfully, we need to have an infrastructure that can support moving goods and services and information to compete in the 21st century. We have to ensure that we're competitive, and that means in regulatory policy, in permitting, and tax policy. We have work to do here at the state level and all across our country. We have to have an energy policy that really invests in the development and production of renewable energy. We have to improve the marketing of our state, maybe the salesmanship of marketing, what's great about Rhode Island and the assets we have in terms of business development. And we have to invest in ensuring that startups and innovative companies and technology companies have the opportunity to grow here in Rhode Island, have access to capital, access to technical assistance that they need. I think those are the issues that we need to focus on. I've been in Congress now for 22 months and been focused on the things that I think we need to do to get Rhode Island's economy and our state's, country's economy back on track, but also fighting for the investments that are necessary to grow the middle class, investments in education, infrastructure, small business. I serve in a small business committee and had the opportunity to work on issues that impact small businesses in a positive way, and have had the opportunity, obviously, to work with our great delegation in bringing resources back to Rhode Island, federal funds, and the jobs that come with them. And finally, I had the opportunity to help individual constituents, over 1,000, with specific cases, specific concerns that they have, and being able to solve those problems. And hope at the end of this debate, we'll have the opportunity to ask you for your vote on November 6th. Thank you.
Thank you. Colonel Doherty.
Thank you very much. Is that close enough? Can you hear me in the back? Thank you very much for having me here. I appreciate the invitation. Congressman Cicilline, thank you for being here. I want to thank John Gregory and Bob Mancini and John Burbridge. Thank you very much for having me here, ladies and gentlemen. This is an incredibly important time in our nation's history. And I'm running for Congress to help effectuate change. I think we need a stronger voice in Washington and stronger voices right here in Rhode Island for the citizens of the 1st District of Rhode Island. Washington is too polarized. This is the greatest country in the world, but Washington's too polarized, and we need leadership. It comes down to leadership, folks. Leadership's not about ranks and privileges and titles. Leadership's about taking responsibility for what happens on your watch. And sometimes leadership means facing the music even when you don't like the tune. Now, as former superintendent of the state police, I had about 350 employees under me and a budget of about between $80 and $100 million a year. And I won't tell you any state police stories here because my wife tells me I can ruin a good meal quick when I tell those stories. So I'll just stick to why I'm running for Congress. I'm fiscally responsible, very fiscally responsible, and when I ran the state police and the Department of Public Safety, I was also the Commissioner of Public Safety, so I have several other agencies under me, including E911 and the fire marshals and a few others. And I believe that every penny spent of taxpayers' money needs to be spent efficiently. So I'm a firm believer if you watch the pennies, the dollars will fall. Quick story, when I was the superintendent, when I came back, I had retired for a couple of years. When I came back as superintendent, I inherited a new building. And you all taxpayers gave us $40 million to build that building. When I came back, I found that everyone was excited about breaking ground, but the cost was up to almost $70 million, and no one took responsibility for why that happened. No one had, in a leadership role, could say that we just allowed this to happen. So What did I do? I stopped that project, and I value engineered that project and built that building for $13 million under budget rather than $30 million over budget. So I'm fiscally responsible, and I talk a lot about our debt, and we need to attack this $16 trillion debt, but we need to do that responsibly as well. America's in a tough time right now. We need tax reform. We need regulatory reform. We need a robust energy policy. We need a real strong healthcare policy in this country. And we need to be pro-business. We need to roll the red carpet out for our business community, be cheerleaders for our business community. So it's the private sector that grows jobs, not government. I'm a firm believer it's the private sector that grows jobs, not government, and I'm a big supporter of business. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you both candidates. Now we'll get into our questions. Again, as I mentioned, these questions have been submitted by either members of the society or members of the Northern Rhode Island Chamber of Commerce. Congressman Cicilline, we're going to ask you to go first to answer this question, and the question is, while buying and selling companies by private investors may have economic value, small business operators who own, operate, and grow their businesses over longer periods of time provide economic stability in their communities that is not found in the buy and flip investors. I know there's a question in here somewhere. And it should be rewarded in the tax code. Would you support a special reduced long-term capital gains tax of 10% for small business owners who have owned and operated their companies for over 10 years?
I think the answer is yes, so long as it was part of a really, I would certainly consider it as long as part of a very serious overhaul of our tax code. I think there is no question that the tax code currently incentivizes the kind of big trades and big sales that you're describing there. We need to have a tax code which both generates the revenues we need to provide the services that we are required to provide as a country and provide for our national defense and provide for the investments in education. So we need to have a tax code that produces a revenue sufficient to meet our responsibilities as a country, but that we ought to be able to separate out people who are risking their own capital in investing in their own business versus folks who manage other people's money in hedge funds and the like. And I think it is appropriate to treat those two different kinds of capital gains differently and to be more generous with people who are actually risking and building their own business as opposed to people who are risking or managing the risk for other people's investments. So yes, that's something I think that we should consider, again, in the context of a comprehensive overhaul of our tax code.
Thank you. Colonel?
Absolutely, I think we should have a conversation about that, especially if some of the small businesses that have skin in the game. We have 93,000 small businesses here in the state of Rhode Island, and I'm a firm believer that we need to, like I said earlier, roll the red carpet out for our small business community. But we can't be picking the winners and losers, so we need to be able to find the requisite area to allow we need tax reform, we need corporate tax reform, and we need to look at that issue in 2013 when Congress goes back in and we look at the Bush tax cuts that are expiring and capital gains. I think it's very important to be very careful. Congress needs to be very careful in how we treat these, approach this issue, because we need to allow these small businesses to thrive.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments, Congressman Cicilline? Okay, or Colonel, anything else on this issue?
No.
Okay, let's move on to the next question now. And I'm going to edit this one so it's even longer than that other one. Okay, our state and country's economic futures depend at least in part on the skills of the workforce. The skills gap in Rhode Island has received a lot of attention lately. Employers report that they are not able to find workers with the skills to fill existing mid-level and highly skilled job vacancies. Rhode Island relies heavily on federal funding to help address the skills gap. This actually is a two-part question. Would you oppose any fiscal year 2013 federal appropriations proposal that decrease funding for workforce development programs? That's part one. And part two, would you oppose any Workforce Investment Act reauthorization effort that reduces access to training and supportive services, especially for low-skilled individuals, or results in any loss of funding? And Colonel, you'll be answering that question first.
No, I would not oppose funding for either of those. I think it's very, very important that we fill the skill sets gap in Rhode Island. And I've talked recently about the Infrastructure Jobs and Energy Independence Act, which in my view is a great bill that would allow American companies to create opportunities for revenue through energy independence. We've been talking about energy independence since 1973, since the Arab oil embargo. We really have failed and have not done a lot with that. So this country needs to become more energy independent. We have tremendous opportunities in Alaska, and in the Gulf of Mexico, and the Outer Continental Shelf. And to bring those revenues from leased land, from federal leased land, to certain areas. One of them would be infrastructure, and one of them that I would want to put in that bill would be for the skill sets gap and for training to help augment the skill sets of our Rhode Island workers. We hear every manufacturing company I go to tells me that they could hire 2 more people tomorrow, 8 more people tomorrow, but they can't match those skills with the job description. So I think that's vital to success.
Okay, thank you. Congressman Cicilline.
There was a reason that I began in a list of 6 things I think we need to do to get our economy back on track, but I began with education and workforce development. And that's because I think it's incredibly important. We have to, and it begins, frankly, from pre-K, Head Start, all the way up through opportunities that are provided by Pell Grants, and then, of course, workforce training and workforce development. This is an area where there's a real difference between the parties in Washington. The Republicans in the Congress and the House side have proposed devastating cuts to the Workforce Investment Act. In fact, the first H.R. 1 would have eliminated the Workforce Investment Act in its entirety. That was a continuing resolution. But there have been cuts of 50 and 75% of the workforce training money, which would be devastating for Rhode Island and frankly devastating for our economy. It really fundamentally doesn't understand that having a trained workforce is one of the keys to rebuilding the economy of this country. In the area of manufacturing, to use as an example, Connecticut has a great model of this sort of junior college model that works really closely with manufacturers to develop a trained workforce for manufacturing in the 21st century. But we need to do that kind of sector track in all the industries in our state. And it is important for workers, it's important for employers, it's important for small businesses that we have resources to do workforce training. Every small business I talk to that has employees that need to be trained lament the cost of training, how difficult that is to meet those costs. It requires more training today than it used to in terms of providing the skill sets that are necessary in almost every business. And so it's very, very important that the federal government maintain, and I think in this difficult economy, increases investments in workforce training. The House Republican leadership has proposed deep, deep cuts in workforce training. And I think this is one of those issues where there's a big difference. I fought against those cuts. If I go back to Washington, I'll continue to fight against them because I've seen the power of workforce investment dollars here and now.
Thank you. Colonel?
I'd just like to respond to that by stating that, that what I'm talking about, the Infrastructure Jobs and Energy Independence Act, would create opportunities for young high school students that don't want to go on to college, but would like a one-year certificate and would be able to obtain a grant to go to school for a one-year certificate, of course, for issues like digital programming and the other issues, the other disciplines within manufacturing would help hone their skills. So I think it's important that we look at a grant program rather than just to raise taxes like the Congressman would want to do to pay for those programs.
Thank you. Congressman Cicilline.
I think this requires much more than a certificate program. What we need to have is workforce training that is effective, that produces employees who have the skills necessary to compete successfully for the jobs that are available to them. And I think if you talk to folks in the technology sector, in the manufacturing sector, in virtually every sector that requires a trained workforce, they will acknowledge that they need employees who have the skills to do the jobs that they have available. That begins with a good K-12 education, and then workforce investment and workforce training. This is one of those areas that I think the government has a responsibility to invest in, and it's good for our economy if people have the skills necessary to become employees and productive contributing members of our society and contributing to the tax base. So I think it's short-sighted not to invest in workforce training.
Okay, thank you both. Now we'll move to our next question, and Congressman, you'll be answering first. Regarding the so-called fiscal cliff, do you support extending all or parts of the 2001 and 2003 tax cuts, known as the Bush tax cuts? If you support extending parts, which parts?
I support the President's position that we should extend the tax cuts which protect the middle class and ensure that family incomes below $250,000 do not have additional tax increases. The President's plan ensures that 98% of Americans would not see a tax increase and 97% of small businesses. I think the reality is we just cannot afford the tax cuts for the top 2%. We are facing tremendous challenges. Part of the conversation has got to be how do we generate additional revenues to meet those challenges. Every economist that has looked at this carefully has said we need to do two things. We need to cut spending and raise revenue. And that by closing tax loopholes, by ending subsidies to big oil and big agricultural corporations, some combination of efforts need to generate revenues. We can't tax our way out of this problem, and we can't cut our way out of this problem. It has to be a balanced approach, and we have to do both things. The truth is we cannot afford tax cuts for the top 2% at tremendous cost to our budget. We need to use that money to pay down the deficit, and so I think the President has it right. Those family incomes that are below $250,000 and preserving all the tax cuts for the middle class.
Thank you. Colonel?
Okay, thank you. I think that it's very important that we push it off till January in this next Congress, because Congress is so divided that there's no way Congress could address that now. So I think we should push it off till January 2013, and obviously should be the number one priority of Congress to address that and have tax reform, individual tax reform, corporate tax reform. So there are important things there to middle class Rhode Islanders, like the child credit and mortgage interest. But I think we, like the Congress has said, we need a balanced approach. But I look at Simpson-Bowles. The Simpson-Bowles plan, which is, by the way, is a bipartisan plan, that's Republicans and Democrats working together, comes up with good ideas for as it relates to tax reform. So that's what I would like to see. But when we talk about people making over $250,000, there are some small businesses making over $250,000. I surely wouldn't want to see the Bush tax cuts expire for people making over $250,000, because some of those small businesses taxed at the individual rate.
Okay, thank you. Congressman, anything else?
Yeah, I would just say that the Congressional Budget Office has found that figure of $250,000 covers 98% of Americans, protects 98% of Americans from a tax increase, and 97% of small businesses. I think the President is right. That's the right cutoff. And I think, again, I would disagree that we should kick the can down the road even to January. This is a responsibility of Congress to do it now. We should allow those tax cuts to expire at the top 2%. Be sure that we can begin to pay down the debt, which is what I'm suggesting happens with that money. And again, we just cannot afford to extend those tax cuts for the top 2%.
Okay, Colonel?
Can I respond to that? Really?
Yep, you got 1 minute. Yep.
Congressman, all due respect, you want to do that now? Congress couldn't agree there's daylight out right now. So I don't know how we're going to do that now. We need a new Congress in 2013 to make that their priority.
Okay, thank you. Now we'll move on to question number 4. And Colonel, you'll be answering this question first. Do you support repeal of all or any part of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, so-called Obamacare?
Well, yes, I do. I think that there are some great ideas from Obamacare, and I think there are from the Affordable Health Care Act, and I think there are some better ideas coming, because I'm a firm believer that regardless of who wins this presidential election, the president in January will understand that the Affordable Health Care Act really isn't, in its present form, good for America. And I think that the pieces there are good, the 26-year-old being able to, 26-year-olds and under being able to be insured on their parents' plan, that's a good idea. My daughter just graduated from college a couple of years ago. My son graduated a couple of years ago, and their friends can't find jobs. I remember being at a graduation last year and saying to my wife, this is a happy day and a sad day, because the jobs just aren't there for these kids. So the 26-year-old is important, excuse me. The pre-existing conditions, the donut hole, closing the donut hole. But what about efficiency? We really didn't address efficiency. We didn't address tort reform. We didn't address evidence-based standards of care in electronic medical records. There's a lot of ideas there that we can put together. I'm a firm believer in bipartisanship, and be able to come up with a bipartisan commission in January to look at that and to make healthcare more efficient so that we can cut the cost. And the most important thing is businesses right now are afraid of the employer mandate. I know most of the businesses that I talk to are afraid of the employer mandate. They, in March of 2013, the businesses throughout the United States are going to be required to make those notifications to their employees, and just as how they're going to insure them. And then the other issue is, if they go to the exchange, we're going to be paying for it anyways. So we need good ideas. Democrats come up with good ideas, where Republicans come up with good ideas. It should be a bipartisan commission that stands the test of time, like Social Security and Medicaid did.
Thank you, Congressman.
I'm always amused about this response of, I want to keep everything that is wildly popular with the public, but none of the mechanisms to pay for it. This is how we got into 2 wars we didn't pay for, the Republican leadership. This is how we got tax cuts that we can't afford. And the reality is, healthcare reform, historic healthcare reform, is good for Rhode Island, it's good for our country. It ensures that 30 million people will have access to health coverage. It ensures that young people would stay on their parents' plan. It closes the donut hole for our seniors. It ends lifetime caps on insurance plans. And it ends discrimination against children for pre-existing conditions. Those are good things. We should be proud of a healthcare system that can provide that. And importantly, it invests in prevention and wellness as really the most effective way to bend the cost curve on healthcare. It provides very serious investments in fraud, waste, abuse, invests in reducing, providing new mechanisms to, new rules, increased penalties, better coordination, stiffer penalties. So there are real investments to eliminate the fraud, waste, and abuses in the healthcare system. But the way we ultimately reduce healthcare costs is to really reduce the delivery of healthcare, keeping people healthier, making investments in prevention and wellness, investments in new technologies, new treatments, electronic medical records, things that will produce better health outcomes and reduce healthcare costs. A great example is what just happened at Women and Infants Hospital. As part of the healthcare reform, they got a grant to make investments in changing the way they deliver healthcare to prematurely born babies. That will help reduce hospitalizations with a new system of home visits before birth, et cetera. The end result will be lowering the rehospitalizations, which will lower healthcare costs, produce better outcomes, and so that's the kind of investments in innovation and in new delivery systems that can reduce healthcare costs over the long term. And so I support it. I think it is good for Rhode Island. I think it's good for our country. We have to be sure it's implemented well and effectively, and it will ultimately drive down healthcare costs.
Okay. Colonel, anything else on this issue?
Well, I'd just like to say that I agree with most of what you just said, Congressman, but the business community needs consistency and they need confidence. And we haven't addressed how we're going to pay for it. It's going to cost the businesses, small businesses, which can close businesses and hurt job growth.
Okay,
yeah, I think what small businesses need is they need to see healthcare costs go down. That's the reality. They need to see healthcare costs go down. And the best way to bend the cost curve, to drive down healthcare costs, is to effectively invest in wellness, prevention, new delivery systems, payment reforms, things that will actually drive down the cost. The other way to do it is just make it more expensive for people to buy it or have less people covered. That's not the right answer. The right answer is to bend the cost curve. Healthcare reform does that, and we need to get to work in making those investments to ultimately reduce healthcare costs for employees. We want a productive, healthy workforce, but we want it to be affordable to small business. And so making those investments is the best way over the long term to drive down healthcare costs.
Okay, moving on to question 5. Congressman, you'll be answering this one first. Do you support or oppose, do you support or oppose full reauthorization of the Federal Transportation Funding Act for highway, transit, water, and aviation systems improvement?
I support the reauthorization, and actually we were proponents on the Democratic side for a greater investment in transportation. This is an area where we have responsibility to understand the urgency of rebuilding the infrastructure of our country. There was a bipartisan bill in the Senate, passed by Democrats and Republicans, that the House Republican leadership refused to take up. And it was premised on the notion of, look, we have got to rebuild this country. Our roads, our bridges, our ports, our transit systems, not only as an effective way to put people back in manufacturers, the city planners. So it's not only a way to put people back to work, but if we are going to rebuild this economy, we have to have an infrastructure that is capable of competing in the 21st century so that we can move goods and services and information to compete successfully. It's also a public safety issue. If you think about what happened in New Orleans, if you think about what happened in Minnesota with the bridge collapse, this is going to continue to happen in cities and towns all across our country if we don't understand the national urgency of rebuilding the infrastructure of our country. And despite the fact that it had bipartisan support on the Senate side, the Republican House leadership did not support it. And the reality is the Ryan budgets made devastating cuts, like 25% in infrastructure investments, which I think is bad in the short term in terms of what it will do to jobs, and it's bad in the long term because rebuilding the infrastructure of our country is an absolute necessity to rebuilding the economy of our country.
Thank you. Colonel?
Yes, I would absolutely support it. I think it's critical that we address this now. As the Congressman had mentioned, we have bridges and highways and byways that are crumbling excuse me, in this country, and even right here locally in Rhode Island, the bridge in Tucker that's just recently been fixed, the Secana River Bridge. I think we need to change the formula, the federal highway formula as to how we pay for these things, but it's absolutely imperative that we do this now because we can't, just like Social Security and Medicare and any other issues that have come up in this country, we can't turn bridges and crumbling roads over to the next generation. We need to fix that now.
Okay, Congressman, anything else on this issue? And Colonel, anything else? Okay, now let's move on to our final question. And certainly we know that the cost of energy in the Northeast is expensive, so this question says, do you support or oppose the federal government permitting the Keystone Energy Oil Pipeline project? And Colonel, we'll ask you to answer this question first.
Well, I think it's imperative that we understand, that the people of this nation understand how important our energy independence is, not just from bringing the cost down at the pump, but also as a matter of national security. So, like I think I mentioned earlier, we've been talking about energy independence since 1973, since our oil embargo, but we really have done nothing about it. We have hardworking Americans that are paying $1.85 for gas 4 or 5 years ago, and now paying close to $4 a gallon for gas. That's money out of their pocket. I absolutely would support would have supported the Keystone Pipeline had I been in Congress. That's 1,700 miles, folks, of pipeline to be laid by USA workers, putting people back to work, putting people back on the job. And I support the efforts in Alaska. Right now we have an opportunity. And by the way, this administration has leased federal land. I'm not criticizing the Obama administration as it relates to leasing federal land, but we can lease more federal land. And look at the unemployment rate in North Dakota. I believe it's about 3.3%. That's because they're able to utilize their energy resources there. So we know we need to. We're an energy-rich country, folks. We need to allow our American companies to utilize those resources and hire American workers to do it, and think about America first in everything we do.
Thank you. Congressman.
Mr. Doherty is right. Oil production in 2011 was at the highest levels in 8 years, and I appreciate him praising the Obama administration for that. The U.S. crude oil imports during 2011 fell to their lowest level in 12 years. And there are more oil rigs in operation in the United States than in the rest of the world combined, according to the best available data, 1,971 oil rigs. There are also millions of leased acres, millions of acres of leased land which has not been explored. So there is enormous opportunity already under land that is under lease for oil exploration. I voted against the proposals in the Congress to circumvent the process that was established by statute and by regulation for review of Keystone. There is an environmental process that's required. There's been an effort by the House Republicans to circumvent that process and authorize Keystone without going through the required environmental impact. I think that would be a mistake. There's a reason we have that environmental impact. The environmental impact consequences of this are serious. We had an amendment when this bill came up on the floor to require that whatever energy was produced would remain in the United States to help drive down energy costs here. That was soundly defeated by the Republicans in the House. And in fact, the estimates about job creation are, according to some estimates, are as low as 2,500 for the project in the United States. As for permanent jobs, TransCanada has said that the permanent jobs will be in the hundreds, certainly not in the thousands. That's TransCanada itself. So the notion of foregoing an important environmental impacts assessment for the creation of a few hundred permanent jobs and with no assurance that it's going to reduce energy costs here, I think is a mistake. We have to be able to do both things. All hands on deck in the development of renewable and clean energy, and also protecting our environmental responsibilities and being good stewards of our environment. But I think there's very little evidence to substantiate the notion that this would produce energy savings for U.S. companies. And in fact, when we tried to keep the energy that was produced there in the U.S., that was defeated by the House Republicans.
Colonel.
I just think it's shameful that we weren't able to have an adult conversation and put American workers back to work and to start that process with the Keystone Pipeline, which would start the process up in Alaska as well, and in the Gulf, and hopefully in 2013 we can have adult conversations in Congress and move the country forward.
Okay.
I think Mr. Doherty doesn't believe that when you have a disagreement, it's not an adult. I think there was a very serious adult conversation about Keystone. There were those in Congress who thought we should circumvent the process that was established by statute and by regulation that conducts an environmental review before that project could go forward because of the environmental consequences. There was an adult conversation about what was the real impact on energy costs, and there was an adult conversation about the real number of jobs that are created and what the long-term environmental impacts would be. We all worked incredibly hard to try to get an amendment passed that would keep whatever energy was produced in the U.S. to help American companies, to help U.S. jobs. That was defeated by the Republicans. So there's a real disagreement about this. This has been a Congress that has had the worst environmental assault in a generation. National environmental groups have acknowledged that this has been an ongoing assault. I just think we can do both things. We can protect our environment and be good environmental stewards for future generations, and we can produce energy. We can invest in solar, wind, geothermal, lots of other energy sources. We can continue to drill, but we have to do it in a balanced way, understanding our responsibilities to the environment as well.
Okay, thank you both for the questions. Now we're going to get to the closing statements. Each candidate will have 3 minutes, and Colonel Doherty, you will be going first.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you all being here on your visit. During your busy morning, hour to listen to the issues. This is an incredibly important time in our nation's history, folks. During the next few weeks, we have an opportunity to examine 2 different candidates with a different set of values and principles and vision for America. One that is conservative but respects all walks of life, and one who is ultra-liberal with no use for centrist ideas. One who is fiscally conservative and pro-business, and one who believes that we should keep taxing businesses to dig our way out of this economic rut. One who spent his entire career protecting the men, women, and children of Rhode Island, or one who is a career politician who has engaged in years of political deal-making and in fact has picked more winners and losers than Simon Cowell. Folks, the narrative is very clear, and the decision is yours. Congressman Cicilline is for higher taxes and redistribution of wealth, and I'm for private sector growth and free market forces. I want to help that, to use the words of President Ronald Reagan, I want to help that forgotten American, that simple soul who goes to work every day, bucks for a raise, and puts his kids through school, and contributes to his church and charity. And he knows at the end of the day, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Thank you very much for having me, folks.
Thank you, Colonel. And Congressman.
Thank you again for hosting this forum, and I would suggest to you that the stakes in this election couldn't be higher, and not only for Rhode Island, but for our country. There are big questions that have to be answered about what kind of America we will build together, and what kind of country we will build together. And I believe we should be working toward an America where everyone has a fair shot at the American dream, where hard work is rewarded, where everyone plays by the same set of rules, and everyone does their fair share. And that means making investments in strengthening the middle class of this country, relying on things that have traditionally made our country strong: small business, innovation, entrepreneurship, investing in education so that we can lead the world as a great center of education, being sure that we invest in rebuilding the infrastructure of our country so that we can compete successfully in the 21st century. Understanding that startups and new businesses are the engine, small businesses are the engine of our state and nation's economy. But working together and understanding that we're all in this together, that we need to have policies that protect our seniors, honor our veterans, invest in small business, and build a kind of America where you can work hard and achieve for yourself and your family. There are big choices to be made. I've worked with Republicans in trying to create the Common Ground Caucus, working with an organization called No Label, trying to reach across the aisle. But that means you have to have folks on the other side that are willing to find common ground, that are willing to compromise and find solutions that are right for America. That's what we need. We have big challenges to face as a country. But the decisions we'll make about the future of Medicare, about the future of Social Security, about the future of small business and workforce development will have an impact not just in the next budget year, but for many generations to come. And I think we want to build an America where you still have a shot at the American dream. The middle class of this country has been hollowed out by this recession, by Wall Street speculators that ran wild, by big banks that took advantage and brought us almost to the brink. And what we need to is go back to the values that I think are not Democratic or Republican values, but values of our country, of investing in the things that have made us strong as a country and that will lead to our economic prosperity as a country. And that means focusing on how we strengthen the middle class and protect the middle class that built this country. I think if we do that, and invest in things that have traditionally built our strong economy, small business, innovation, entrepreneurship, startup companies, stabilize the housing market, making sure we have tax policies where everyone pays their fair share and deal with the fiscal cliff in a responsible way, that our best days are ahead. And I thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here today.
Show our appreciation for the candidate. Again, we want to thank you so much for coming out today. We want to thank the candidates for being us. We want to thank Fidelity Investments for being the sponsor, and my good friend Bob Mancini, the Rhode Island Society of CPAs, who enjoyed hosting this with the society. Have yourself a good morning.